Let's start with this for this episode, which is I was talking beforehand about keeping this episode at a reasonable length, and that seems to be what the speech was last night. It was kept at a reasonable length from Kamala Harris, much shorter and much more succinct than the former president's speech just a month ago. Was that your interpretation from this as well, a more succinct speech?
I was surprised, to be honest with you. I was expecting longer when I could tell that she was starting to wrap up. I was like, oh, okay, it's done. I mean, I think overall, what was it? Maybe like 40 minutes, which is still like a lengthy speech in general. But yeah, for something like this, I thought it would be longer. But you know what? It seems like she feels she got her points across. And I think she had some really strong parts, especially at the end there. So I guess finish while you're ahead.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I always tell, candidates is land your plane, right? Deliver your message, land your plane. And she seemed to do that. And I agree with Brittany on that. So, that's I think she delivered it, and got an A+ from that standpoint.
And in the same respect, too, I think that there's the question of, okay, how in depth on the actual policy did you get? Because there was lots of talk about the issues, but then there was a seeming lack of substance on policy, which had been the criticism for some time. And of course, we've talked on the show before about the criticism of not speaking as much to the press and having more of those answers come out. Was that something that we still felt was perhaps a little bit lacking, saying, okay, I got these great ideas, but how is it actually going to get done?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, when you're dealing with someone who's been in office as Vice President of the United States for the last 4 years, right? You have a little bit of a trickier time because you have to kind of fall back on the policies that you've had and this administration has had, but then trying to carve out kind of a place of your own. And it's a very hard balance for somebody like Kamala Harris to make because if she leans too much on the past, obviously she has to own it, and which she has to own anyway. And that's what the Trump campaign is going to try to do. But then try to, kind of step out, like I said, on her own with something that's unique, and be careful not to offend or criticize the administration that she's just been part of. So it's a very fine line and, really going to be difficult for her. And the Trump campaign is going to try to, hold her accountable for all of those things.
I think yesterday was the first time that I did see her sort of dive a little bit into policy, even though it wasn't all that much. I think in comparison to what she has been saying, it was a little bit more. I imagine that we'll continue to see more as we get to the debate. That's a few weeks away. And I'm sure they're also still trying to figure out exactly, what they stand for. To Tim's point, obviously she's the current vice president. So of course, she can work with the winds of the administrations, but there's also been losses. A lot of Americans are reeling from inflation and the economy, the cost of gas and groceries and all those sorts of things. And so I think they are trying to navigate how to do that. And we know as much because reports indicated last week that the Harris campaign was specifically working internally, like to figure out how do we message on the economy when I am the sitting vice president and people are hurting.
Yeah, and I think too, it spoke to the fact that we saw, uh, I think, a move away from progressives that was noticeably evident. We didn't see too many references to California, her California past. We had kind of predicted this. I think everybody here predicted this kind of coming in, that there would be a little bit of a distancing. And that's what we kind of saw on the last day too, because the last day kind of has the most visibility to it. And maybe so does the first day, especially given it was President Biden. But then everyone wants to hear from the eventual nominee, and that's what we saw today. And there was, or last night, and that's kind of the biggest difference between the two speeches is how it started and how it finished. And I think a lot of people would suggest that that was deliberate to kind of have those moderate voices for the biggest eyes in the room.
Yeah, I mean the Democratic Party right now is very much dominated by the progressive wing of the party, and that is not good in a national election. And they've got to be able to shift towards the middle, particularly in the swing states that they have to go win in order to be successful in November. And it is a horse race in those states. California in the presidential doesn't matter. It's everything else that we're talking about, Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and those states that are going to make the biggest difference. And that's where Kamala Harris is going to have to grow some support and some believability from moderate voters. If you notice, I think one of the print reporters put on X or Twitter, whatever we're calling it these days, that Kamala Harris didn't even mention Oakland, right? She wouldn't mention San Francisco. She mentioned East Bay. She made allusions to it, but she didn't talk specifically about it. And they're, smart for pivoting away from that. But she's gonna have to deal with that at some point because she has been U.S. Senator from California. She has been California Attorney General, and she was San Francisco District Attorney.
Something else that she didn't say was Democrats in her speech. And she said patriotism or form of that about 20 times. And she said country or nation about 20 times. And I think you're right. Democrats, we've seen they've had this issue sort of with wokeness and woke culture. And that's been a huge criticism from Republicans. And that wasn't the Democrat Party that we saw yesterday. And I think that's going to pay them dividends. It's the wokeness that turns a lot of people off. And you even saw Obama saying something like, listen, we have these new terms and sometimes it takes people a little bit of time to get used to them. So don't immediately criticize and think they're trying to disrespect you, right? And I think that's helpful. I think that's something that Democrats have probably needed to pivot on over the last few years. And I think it's a really smart move that they're doing it now, especially when there's those probably 10%, 15% of voters who are undecided, who are the disenfranchised Republicans, aren't totally on board with voting for a Democrat. But when you're not inserting that ideology, that makes it a little bit easier of a pill to swallow and say, like, you know what, I'll still remain a Republican, but maybe I am willing to vote for Harris this election.
I think one of the interesting things too, especially as we talk about swallowing the pill and just the optics of it, was the impressive ability by the DNC security, and you would have to thank the Chicago Police Department as well for the lack of involvement from the protesters on the event. Obviously, if you pay attention, as we said, to the X, the Twitter website, you could definitely see the protests, and you see that didn't really make it to the mainstream when those banners would get unfurled at the event. Perhaps it's a great strategic thing. Those "We Love Joe" and the "We Love Kamala" and the California and the Georgia, whatever state banners would go up, and they would block the banners for the Gaza ceasefire banners that would then go behind it. So just an impressive show there. I want to read a quote from Brad Sherman, Democrat congressman from California, who spoke at one of these events on the side for Democratic Majority for Israel, who talked about. He said. First, we win elections. The other side can't win elections, and that's why they're blocking traffic. And there's some truth to that, which is that the protesters, I think, in the past and throughout this whole past year, have felt that they could intimidate members of Democratic Party and those on the progressive left and on the left, just in general, to implement policy. Then, and we saw in the speech last night a very defiant pro-Israel candidate in Kamala Harris. And then the question is, of course, does that translate to office? But at least as far as getting votes is concerned, she seems to have done a good job in trying to reclaim a number of voters that Israel is a top priority for him.
Yeah, I think that was probably, in my opinion, her strongest part of the evening when she was talking about Israel. And, Republicans, we always say Israel's our greatest ally in the Middle East. The situation in Gaza right now is somewhere that we have found division between Republicans and Democrats. And her saying, like, I fully support Israel. Not only do I support their right to defend themselves, I'll also make sure they're able to defend themselves. That was a resounding endorsement for continuing to support Israel. But she still said at the same time, and hitting those Democrats, is that, but the situation, regardless, and like all the innocent lives lost, that's unacceptable. And I think that definitely probably struck a chord with Republicans and her support for Israel. I wonder if it was the same way for Democrats on the liberal wing side of the party, or the liberal wing of the party, if they feel that she was strong enough in supporting them and their desire for a Palestinian state.
Yeah, they've certainly tested the issue. They pulled the issue. They know exactly where their voters are on the Israel-Palestinian issue in those swing states. And Kamala Harris went right to that last night. And we saw that after months and months of hesitation by the Democratic Party and kind of, which way are they going to go? And you've got Senator Fetterman and others who didn't even, attend the DNC because of kind of the waffling and the dissing of Israel by the Democratic Party. The Harris campaign certainly has tested it. They know what their message is there. They know that the American people are on the side of Israel, and that's kind of winning the day. So that's where they're going to go. But that's where President Trump has been for the balance of this campaign. And so that's going to be an issue of debate, and it will be hard because, as was noted, Kamala Harris is going to have to motivate that liberal far left base to get out to vote, even in those swing states. And that's going to be important. And you do not want them sitting on their hands if she strays too far to the center.
And I think one important takeaway, the last point to make on this too, is that you hear the word defend itself, the phrase defending itself. That doesn't necessarily mean offensive weapons. I mean, it could mean offensive weapons, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And that'll be interesting to kind of pay attention to see if Republicans will jump on that as debates were on. If the campaigns on the other side are that focused enough to make a point of that language and what that could possibly mean as far as ending a war with Hamas, and of course finishing one with Hezbollah, which has currently been that Cold War area at the moment. I'll look at a couple more issues with you before we jump off. The big one is economy. Did you feel that there was a deliberate, another deliberate thing, I guess, to say maybe the price fixing thing is not the greatest messaging in the history of the world? And then just thinking about other ways how to create better economic policy and try to figure out what that is ahead of the next debate.
Well, they floated that balloon up there and it got popped really quickly from both the left and the right. So Harris probably needs to go back to the drawing board on economic policy. Right now, they don't really have a clear vision on that. And a lot of it, quite frankly, is being driven by other forces. You have Fed Chairman Powell, who is speaking, today in Jackson Hole to, groups of folks who are, you'd find in Jackson Hole in the middle of August, and is going to make some very impactful statements regarding the economy, and that's going to drive certain things and what we see. We've also seen where we have cryptocurrency and those types of companies putting in lots of money into this presidential campaign and have a vested interest. So there are a lot of influences at work from the economic side. And I'm really curious to see not just what Harris does, but also how Trump deals with that as well, because all of these influencers are kind of playing both sides.
The economy, in my opinion, is 100% Republican winning issue. But the problem is will Donald Trump, who is at the top of the ticket, be able to focus on messaging on the economy, or is he going to continue talking about AI crowd sizes and DEI and if the vice president is Black? So, yes, I think Democrats are 100% losing on the economy, but at the same time, people are tired of the craziness that comes out of Trump's mouth. So we'll see. Economy is always like the number one issue for people, but Donald Trump's not really talking about it in an effective way. He had that press conference last week, and what's really funny is that when we hear Donald Trump, like, he's so enthusiastic about insulting people and the personal attacks when you see him at all of these different rallies, but it's when he has to stick to a script, which he had to last week, and that gigantic binder, it looks like he is a kid who's upset that he has to read and his mom is making him. It was just so boring and wasn't able to deliver it with the same kind of punch that people expect and like from him. And so, yes, I think that it is Republicans, I think it is our position to lose on the economy because it is so easy for us to win, but we are not doing the best job we could be.
Well, and the other thing too is when been looking at the issue polls, I know we see at the CBS issue polls, and you just see overwhelming double-digit favorability for the former president in lots of these polling areas, especially on the economy as well. And it's been a consistent lead for some time, going back to the Biden administration as well. So that's of course an important point. And then bringing this back home as usual, what's the California takeaway for this? Because as we said before, there's definitely the move to not talk about California and her background growing up, and as mentioned, East Bay over Oakland and things of that nature. We didn't hear a lot from the governor this past week as well, even though he was there in attendance. Saw Dolores Huerta, who made a great cameo in the national coverage. She was there as a delegate, but outside of that, not too much else related back to California. So what should Californians take away from this event?
I think Californians, honestly, are probably happy to see their former senator, someone who, has such strong ties to California in this position. It's exciting. California is a blue state anyway. And so it was going to go for the vice president anyway. And you might as well embrace it and run with it for all of those Democrats in California. I think that it makes sense that she perhaps isn't leaning too much into the San Francisco or some of those other very innately California issues, because they're issues that Biden said, we look to California to shape the state. Well, California is the best place in the world, but not under Democrat leadership, in my opinion. And so maybe we shouldn't be looking to California as an example of how we should be framing the entire country. But yes, I'm sure people are excited to be seeing their former senator up on that stage.
Yeah,
And
one
Tim,
thing I'd add to
oh yeah,
that
go
is,
go for it. Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say something too, but go ahead.
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, Tim, the thing I was gonna say, and I was gonna say maybe bad day in memory for Brittany, but I remember talking to you, Tim, the day when Kevin McCarthy resigned, and we had the whole conversation about what that meant for California as far as losing Kevin McCarthy. We've Nancy Pelosi's no longer in leadership. They, of course, both play an important role behind the scenes, but then also with Senator Feinstein passing away as well, that's a lot of people to lose as far as California's notoriety in the country and what Kamala would mean for California in that respect.
Well, anytime you've got someone from California who is in high federal office, right? That's good for California in general. It was when President Reagan was in office. It was great for California, and you mentioned a number of leaders, including Kevin McCarthy, who've been in prominent roles and been able to that's been good for California and Californians, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. One of the things particular to the region here in Bakersfield is looking at congressional seats that are swing seats here in California, not just there, but across California. The David Valadao seat, number one, is that what that campaign is going to have to do is, and it's going to be a little bit harder because you've got Democrats a little bit more motivated by Kamala Harris, but he's going to have to win by getting those Kamala Harris, David Valadao voters who are going to have to check their ballots for Kamala Harris for president and David Valadao for Congress, and he's going to need those voters in order to win. And so being able to pull them over and talk to them and be someone who can make the case that he will best represent them in Congress, which I think he absolutely can do, while those same voters are attracted to the message that Kamala Harris is delivering, and still also keep the voters who are the Trump based voters. So it becomes it's not a different type of campaign that they necessarily have to run, and they've been used to doing that prior. But really, what he has to do is be able to not alienate those Kamala Harris voters, so that we can get those crossovers voting for that Republican congressional candidate.
Right. I know that's going to be a big thing for voters there. And of course, in California, across the state, there's several districts in the Central Valley, and some that are even occupied by Democrats right now, looking to make Republican gains. And then, of course, the same situation in New York as well. And then you have those little ones across the country, like Nebraska with Don Bacon's seat, and little ones that you wouldn't think as well. But definitely California is top of mind when it comes to the congressional race and control of the House come this fall. Thank you both so much. I know this was a last second thing, but appreciate it as always, and able to hear both of you speak on this event is really something. So thank you again.
Anytime. Thank you very much.